The Obsidian Flames era of the Pokemon trading card game has come and pretty much gone in just under 2 months. And I wanted to take an opportunity today to look back at the set and see which cards are good, see which cards were a disappointment, and how they impacted the overall game. I'm Jet from inthirdperson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's talk about Obsidian Flames right now. And this is not to say that my opinion of these cards is going to stay the same forever. As new sets are added, they might bring new life to older cards, but I'm just talking about Obsidian Flames right now in the moment, as these are the hot new cards in the current game. We'll admit that expectations for the set were not that high. Yes, we're getting a Charizard, very collectible, actually a very playable Charizard as well, which is the first time we've gotten one in some time. Yes, Radiant Charizard's great, but that kind of is a one-off attacker. It did win a tournament largely by itself once with Shady Dealing. Shoutouts to Piper Lapine. But yeah, most of the time Charizard cards are pretty bad, and this one is actually very good. However, there were just a lot of filler cards in this set because this was only comprised of like one mainline Japanese set, Ruler of the Black Flame, and then all of the other cards came from starter decks that were exclusive to Japan, meaning a lot of the cards in this set were just underpowered relative to what we've seen so far. The only notable Pokemon that we really got out of this set, at least in terms of being able to build a deck around it, is Tera Charizard EX. Easily the highest profile card. It's Charizard, popular Pokemon. It's a dark type that hits for a really good weakness in Gardevoir and Mew, and it also accelerates energy to itself and others. With the Infernal Rain ability, gets to accelerate 3 energy. All of that in and of itself is great. And then its attack is pretty good as well. Burning Darkness does 180 damage and 30 more damage for each prize your opponent has taken. I think that sort of restriction makes it a little wonky in the early game, but as an end game attacker, it's absolutely crazy. And of the decks, the net new decks that came out of Obsidian Flames, using Obsidian Flames cards, this is kind of the only one that even mattered. Let's take a look at Limitless, where we are tracking a lot of online tournaments, some IRL tournaments here as well. And Charizard was the second most played deck, played over 4,000 matches with it, and it had a winning percentage of 47.95%, which is, it's not bad, but it definitely is a little short on some of the other top decks in the format, like Zeratina Lost Zone Box, or just Lost Zone Box in general. But it wasn't the worst winning percentage of the decks in the top 10. Some of its highest finishes include the Yokohama Champions League, where Yusuke Mahashi got top 8 at the event with a really unique build, Charizard EX and Gallade. We covered this on the channel already. In case you missed it, I'll put a link in the description of this channel, or yeah, go find it. I'll probably show the thumbnail for the video right here. At Pittsburgh Regionals, which was the only major international event that we got to see it in, it kind of didn't do so hot. It got 50, the top placement was 59th. Shoutouts to Christopher Wigglesworth. And when it came to meta share, it was not one of the top 5 most played decks in day 1 or day 2. However, it did a little better in the other divisions, where a Charizard got top 8 in seniors, and in the junior division, it actually got 2nd place. Kudos to them. Now let's look at its matchup chart. And I think this is a really fascinating thing to look at, and maybe we'll spend some more time on the channel looking at matchup charts for different decks, just to see what decks are, how the matchups play out for each deck. And Charizard's matchup spread is a little wonky, to be honest. It has a really good matchup. Okay, getting my mouse here. Really good matchup against Mew. Mew has a really hard time dealing with Charizard having really high HP, dark type, accelerates to itself, and having to rely on Mew VMAX as a 3-prize attacker. Even with the Excelgor tech that we have started to see, it's not really enough to overcome that matchup. And it does have a good matchup against Lugia, single strike, and a slightly above average matchup against Miraidon. But the other matchups are pretty rough. Giratina Lost Zone Box, a win rate of only 38.22%. Giratina can just kind of erase a Charizard and then do a lot of damage to another one, and then Sableye can come in and clean up. It's a hard go. Gardevoir is actually, I'm kind of surprised that this is currently in favor of Gardevoir. I think Charizard being able to hit it for weakness and having really high HP can play a big role in Charizard having that match favored. I think if we play this out long enough right now, this is like 400-ish matches, that if this played out long enough, I think Charizard would have the edge. But then again, Gardevoir does have a lot of tricks up its sleeve, being able to have a bunch of single prize attackers, being able to snipe the bench, and so on. So I could see this being like about even. Lost Zone Box, this is bad. The single prizer, the deck moves really fast. Sableye being an absolute terror. Maybe the Jirachi from Paradox Rift could turn things around for not just Charizard, but everything in general against Lost Zone. Miraidon, slight advantage. Chen-Pao Baxcalibur, actually a bad matchup. Chen-Pao, the times I've played this, I really liked Chen-Pao in this because Chen-Pao can just load up a whole bunch of energy and one-shot a Charizard, no problem. Arceus Giratina, this is a deck that actually didn't get to see a lot of play. I think this kind of faded over time, but the inclusion of a grass attacker, whether for the most part it was superior, sometimes with the Leafeon, but the inclusion of a grass attacker made that match apparently really bad. Some other ones here, Inteleon Urshifu was bad. I think that's a deck, once it gets set up, that you can... I've heard some ways of playing this where you just do a ton of damage on the board and then you Yoga Loop and then Urshifu, and you can just take a whole bunch of prizes before Charizard can really get going here. So Inteleon Urshifu had a way of exploiting that matchup. Palkia Chen-Pao, I would think this is a little more in favor of Charizard, but apparently not. Palkia doesn't hit as hard as I would like it to, but it is also a very consistent deck, and Charizard can be a little wonky to set up. So I can kind of see how Palkia has a little bit of an edge there. And then Mew Genesect. This one I find interesting and something that I want to mess around with going forward. Charizard has a losing matchup at the moment against Mew Genesect, and this is DTE Mew, and I think that the presence of Path to the Peak in that deck makes for a really rough time for Charizard. And in general, I really want to mess around with DTE Mew because I think now is a good time for that deck because no one's playing Spiritomb anymore. While most players stuck with the Arceus and Pidgeot for playing Charizard, there are a lot of different ways to play the deck. Charizard with Gallade and Kirlia got top 8 at the Yokohama Champions League, which we covered here. I saw a list from Japan with the Mew VMAX, and I've seen some other lists since. I've seen Charizard with Regidrago, Charizard with Urshifu, just because it's easy to set up and it accelerates energy. It's pretty splashable in other decks as well, and I'm really excited to see this deck continue to evolve. Oh, Lost Box variant, that was actually a variant of the deck I meant to cover up until the moment the Champions League results came out and I saw the Gallade Kirlia list and decided to do that instead. But I do think there is a bright future for Charizard, and I look forward to seeing the deck evolve. The other high-profile card that ended up doing pretty well was Pidgeot EX. With its quick search ability, lets you grab a card of your choice from the deck. At times, it can be a little tricky to set up because that's usually the second thing you want to set up with Rare Candy, and getting the first thing set up with Rare Candy can be hard enough as is, but when it got rolling, it was great. Most of the time, it got played with Charizard, but I do think that this is a card that will see more play and find homes in other decks going forward. That being said, the rise of Miraidon could be a problem for this deck, as this becomes an easy to prize target going forward. I do like the card a lot. I do want to see it get more play. I think it will get more play, but the rise of Miraidon is going to be a factor going forward. Baby Pokemon came back as part of Obsidian Flames, and I really like this Cleffa card. It only has 30 HP, which is a big problem. It does have Free Retreat, which is nice, but I do like Grasping Draw as your attack on turn 1 going second. Lets you draw until you have 7 cards in your hand, gives you a really nice spread of cards to work with once you are going into the following turn. Yeah, you're probably going to cough up a prize, but the extra cards that you draw could be what you need to really get rolling. This one didn't see a lot of play, but I do think it does have a home in some setup heavy decks, and I think this will see a little more play eventually. Solrock Lunatone has a really unique mechanic to it. When you play the Lunatone and there's a Solrock in play, you can prevent all effects of stadiums done to your Pokemon, which opened up some really weird possibilities, like your deck being able to work through Path to the Peak even though you have Rulebox Pokemon in play, like Shadow Rider Calyrex is a deck that we covered during the Obsidian Flames run. And with Solrock Lunatone, you can continue to Underworld Door even with Path in play, which is a very cool combo. And there are a number of decks that could benefit from playing Solrock Lunatone. However, having to have 2 bench spots committed to this particular tactic seems like a lot of bench space and maybe a little too much bench space for many decks to commit to. So we ended up not seeing this combo that much, but I do think it's very intriguing and more decks will probably play around with this going forward. Glamora EX has a really annoying ability. Its Dust Field ability cuts your opponent's bench down to 3 Pokemon. And one of the things I liked about it is that there were just a ton of different ways to play this deck. You could play it as a control deck with Path to the Peak and Solrock Lunatone. I saw this paired up with Rapid Strike Urshifu. We notoriously got destroyed by a Glamora Urshifu in a previous video. I covered this deck with Palkia, so Palkia Glamora, which was kind of cool as well. At this point in time, I just don't think there is enough sauce behind Glamora to make it competitively viable, but I do think this is something we should kick the tires on a little further. Toedscruel EX should have been played more than it was. I mean, on top of being a grass attacker that can hit Charizard for weakness, it was the free deck in PTCG Live, and it was bugged in PTCG Live for its entire existence to date. It might be patched out by the time you watch this, but up until now, this card has actually been broken where it does more damage if there's a certain situation you can create. I cannot remember the name of the Cherim. I think it's if Cherim is in play, it actually does more damage than it should. And even with that unintentional buff, nobody played Toedscruel. I think it's just a little too awkward of a deck to get set up. You kind of have to have grass energy on all of your bench Pokemon in order for it to do maximum damage. And, you know, with that, you're using Cherim, you're using Eldegoss, lots of small Pokemon. You have to find a draw engine in there as well. It just feels like it's a little too awkward to play at this point in time. Tyranitar EX was a card I was really excited to play. Being able to do upwards of 250 damage with only 2 fighting energy seems great. It's high HP, also really intriguing at 340, but it ended up being really awkward to get the damage on the bench, whether you're trying to use Gengar or Lucario or any other means. It was just a really awkward deck to get rolling, and this ended up not seeing much play at all. I tried testing out different versions of it, and I ended up really not liking it. However, I do see this pop up more on Japanese lists where they have Pokemon Card 151, and I think the new Dodrio is going to help this deck out a lot. It's a deck that damages itself, or Dodrio damages itself while also drawing cards, making it a really nice combo for Tyranitar EX. Decidueye EX, in the video that I made of this card, I thought initially this card was complete garbage, and I'm glad to have been proven wrong. Oscar Madsen cooked up a cool Decidueye deck and shared it on Twitter, and I ended up trying it out, and I think it's not bad. I do think it's a bit underpowered, but it is a fun way to play the deck, and you do have some cool healing options with the Altaria. I played against this deck. Other people were running it like once or twice, but it isn't complete crap, and I do enjoy playing it. I don't think this one has much of a future, but I think it was very cool to see this deck be brought to life in a time when I thought it wasn't even possible. So shout outs to Oscar Madsen for really cooking in the kitchen on this one. If you're interested, I'll put the link to this video in the description as well. We also got an extra Miraidon EX, a different one. This one is another one that came from the starter decks in Japan. And like just flat out, it's not as good as Scarlet and Violet Miraidon EX. And most players opted to not put this into their deck. But in Japan, I do see some lists that do feature this Miraidon EX, and I will admit, Free Retreat is kind of cool, and its Techno Turbo move isn't so bad either. For 3 lightning energy, you do 150 damage. You can possibly take out a basic Pokemon while also attaching a basic energy card from your discard pile to one of your bench Pokemon. So you're getting a little more energy on the board. You have a bulky Free Retreater. You've also got 3 energy on the Miraidon, which isn't bad. You can take out single prizes with that, and it's holding energy for Raichu to come in the end game and smash for 1 billion damage. Palafin was a card that seemed to have some upside, really intriguing attack with Justice Kick, being able to do 210 damage on a single prizer, but the restriction on movement, having to have moved into the active in order to activate Justice Kick, was probably a little too much. I never saw this card in play, and I feel like there's probably a world where maybe this sees a little more action. Like, there's just so much good water support, Palkia, Chien-Pao, Baxcalibur, Irida, that maybe at some point someone figures out the right mix to make Palafin work, but at this point in time, there just wasn't enough. Wishcash is getting a shout out here, largely because it has one party trick. If you're playing this in a Lugia deck and you load it up with 4 reversal energy, you can discard 12 cards. I did lose to this once and I was very annoyed by that, but overall this deck did not see, and this card just didn't see a lot of play, but it's very annoying to get hit by this, and I think pretty awesome if you are playing it and you get the combo to work. Belly Bolt is a card that didn't really see a lot of play. I'm guessing that Zorobox decks did include this as a Miraidon tech. However, going forward with Miraidon gaining in popularity, this could see more play because the Insulator ability blocks attacks from your opponent's lightning Pokemon, and Miraidon right now doesn't really run any non-lightning Pokemon. However, the implementation of Mew EX as part of Scarlet and Violet 151 could change that, and Mew EX would... Mew EX doesn't even shred through this because you can only copy Thunderous Edge and you're only doing 100 damage. So that might not be so great. Gonna have to think about that one. Besides having great artwork, this Altaria card does have a cool attack, does 110 damage, and puts your opponent to sleep, like asleep. They have to flip 2 coins instead of 1 to wake up. And it's a nice tech in the Regidrago deck, but Regidrago didn't get any better. I love the Regidrago deck in all of its forms, and it is still a fringe rogue deck at best, and I'm starting to have concerns with the consistency of Regidrago, which is already not the most consistent deck to begin with, but with so many attackers teched into that deck, Giratina, Goodra, Duraludon, Noivern, Altaria, and I know I'm missing at least one more, it gets harder and harder to set up Regidrago, and I do have concerns that we are watering down the deck a little too much. Here's a snapshot of cards that just ended up being busts in this format. Clefable EX gives your Psychic Pokemon free retreat. Kind of cool in Shadow Rider, but not really enough to make it worthwhile. Absol kind of has a little bit of a control element to it, not really enough to make things happen. Claydol with Kaboom Doll lets you drop your opponent's HP all the way down to 10. It does combo with another Trevenant card, but this never saw any play. Vespiquen EX is an interesting attack that also does some spread damage, but the high attack cost, 3 grass energies, really hard to power up, really hard to get set up, didn't see any play. Ice Q is one that I really did try. I tried to build a Chien-Pao deck with Ice Q, and I found it to be awful. It was just better to attack with Chien-Pao almost all the time, rather than try and wall them off with Ice Q, which just wasn't particularly strong. Houndstone EX, you have to discard too many Psychic Pokemon to make that work. Cloth EX, I know a couple of content creators made videos with Cloth, but I don't think the ability is good enough. Victini EX at least seems kind of interesting. There is ways of getting that ramped up pretty quickly, but low HP, and it was just better to stick with Charizard most of the time, so Victini just didn't see any play. Palmot EX is kind of cool. 220 snipe is really nice, but it is at stage 2, and it turns out with lightning decks right now, basics are the way to go. And Houndoom EX, yes, it does have the ability to block attacks from basics, but it just wasn't good enough. Moving on to trainer cards, I actually really love the trainer cards and how they can impact the entire meta, and I feel like we got a really weak set of trainers in Obsidian Flames. Gita was probably the highest profile supporter card that we got, and I still don't think it's a bad card. Being able to attach 2 basic energy to your Pokemon is really awesome, but the restriction of not being able to attack on that turn is rough. I mean, in certain decks, turn 1 going second, it doesn't really hurt you because you weren't attacking anyway. And because of that, I do think there is some hope for this card, but we never really saw this one get any play whatsoever. Town Store is a really nice stadium. It does let you grab a tool card from your deck and put it into your hand. And in particular, for any decks running for a Sealstone, this was a lifesaver. Just having one more out to for a Sealstone makes it absolutely amazing. Letter of Encouragement, I thought this card was going to see a little more play than it did. Certain decks like Chen Pao could use this, being able to grab 3 basic energy from your deck, though having to have gotten knocked out in the previous turn can be a bit of a problem. And I think because of that, players just went with other easier ways of getting energy, such as energy retrieval and superior energy retrieval. And I think this goes even further down the totem pole. Once we get Earthen Vessel from Paradox Rift, where you get to discard a card and just grab 2 basic energy from your deck, and I think that is going to be an incredibly popular card in a lot of different decks, and Letter of Encouragement probably won't see much play going forward. Pokemon League headquarters is a stadium that kind of got hyped up as a Lost Box counter, forcing basic Pokemon to have 1 extra energy to attack. I hardly ever saw this card and was hardly ever impacted by it. I don't think it was enough to slow down the Lost Box decks, as Lost Box continued to do really well. Maybe this sees a little more play as something like Miraidon gets popular, although Miraidon at this point in time has a ton of energy acceleration and can probably bypass the stadium really easily. I am not writing this stadium off just yet, but I don't think it hit as hard as I thought it would leading up to the release of Obsidian Flames. Vengeful Punch is an interesting Gardevoir counter in particular, but just a nice counter in particular. If your Pokemon gets knocked out while it has this attached, you drop 4 damage counters on your opponent's active Pokemon. And even with Jirachi out, this is still going to work because this hits the active and you're going to be fine on that front. If we were playing more Gardevoirs on PTCG Live, this would be great, but Gardevoir kind of fell off the face of the earth in PTCG Live, at least if you're playing ranked ladder play. If you're playing in tournaments, Gardevoir is still an incredibly popular Pokemon, but on PTCG Live, because Charizard is just so popular, the Gardevoirs have kind of gone away. I do think this is a card that is worthy of play going forward and worthy of more exploration, but at this point in time, yeah, just kind of an interesting tech for the time being. Poppy is a card that I thought had little to no use in the game, moving up to 2 energy from one of your Pokemon to another, but some savvy players found some ways to make this card work. In particular, there's an Arceus build, like where Arceus is the main attacker, and you could actually use Poppy to move energy over to Greninja. Like, you move 2 energy from your Arceus over to Greninja, and then you attach a jet energy on a Greninja, move it in the active, and all of a sudden you're using Moonlight Shuriken when your opponent probably didn't think you had a snipe attack, which is very cool. So in retrospect, of the Scarlet and Violet sets to date, I think this is the worst one. And based on what we've seen of Scarlet and Violet 151 and the upcoming Paradox Rift set, I think that it's going to hold that title for a while. Unfortunately, just being based on one mainline Japanese set and a whole bunch of leftover cards from starter decks really nerfed this set to the point where it didn't have much of an impact on the meta. That being said, Charizard is a very strong Pokemon. I don't think we've seen the ceiling of what this can do, and at the very least, I think there are going to be a lot of creative ways to build decks around this card, and I look forward to that. And I think the other silver lining with the Obsidian Flames meta is that it was very short. It lasted less than 2 months. Pokemon Scarlet Violet 151 is coming out. By the time you watch this, it's probably out by now, if not out later today on PTCG Live. And that has more meta shifting cards in it, which is overall great. Thus concludes our look at the Obsidian Flames set at this point in time. Again, I'm not saying that this is how we're going to look at this set forever. Over time, new cards are going to come in and may breathe new life into the Obsidian Flames set. But for the time being, it feels like it was a little bit of a bust. But what say you? Did you like Obsidian Flames? Did you hate it? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, InThirdPerson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.